She left him with nothing but an empty office and a broken heart, fully expecting him to fade away. She never imagined that by walking out, she was actually opening the door for the love of his life to walk in. Karma doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it's just the sound of someone else finally treating you right. The silence of an empty office building at 10 p.m. is a heavy thing. It's not just quiet, it's a physical weight. It presses against your ears and settles into the hollow spaces of your chest. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass, watching the city rain streak the window like tears on a face that had forgotten how to cry. Down below, the streetlights smeared into blurry ribbons of gold and red on the wet asphalt. Up here, everything was gray. At 48, you aren't supposed to be packing your life into cardboard boxes. You're supposed to be thinking about retirement packages, about anniversary trips, about the legacy you've built. You aren't supposed to be watching 20 years of marriage and half your business assets dissolve because the person you trusted decided she wanted something newer. The betrayal hadn't been loud. It hadn't been a screaming match. It was a signature on a legal document and a cold, dismissive look that said I was no longer necessary. That was the part that hurt the most. The feeling of being discarded like an outdated piece of furniture. I placed my hand against the cold glass. The chill seeped through my palm, grounding me, reminding me that I was still here, even if the world I knew was gone. I felt old tonight, not just in my joints but in my soul. A deep, weary exhaustion that sleep wouldn't fix. Then a sound broke the stillness. Click, clack, click, clack. The rhythmic, purposeful sound of heels on the hardwood floor. It wasn't the frantic pace of the movers who had cleared out the other offices earlier. It was steady, gentle. I turned, expecting the cleaning crew. Instead, I saw Sophie. She was standing in the doorway, silhouetted by the dim light of the hallway. Sophie was 25. A junior associate who had joined us only a year ago. She had bright eyes that always seemed to take in more than people realized, and an optimism that I used to find naive. Until now. She shouldn't have been here. The payroll had been cut. The staff had abandoned the ship the moment the rumors of the divorce settlement hit the company accounts. Everyone had left. Except her. "You're still here," I said, my voice sounding rough, unused to speaking in the dark. "Someone has to be," she replied softly. Her voice wasn't filled with pity. It was matter of fact. Calm. She walked toward me, crossing the distance of the empty room. In her hands she held 2 steaming ceramic mugs. As she got closer, the bitter metallic smell of the rain was replaced by something warmer. Earl Grey tea and a faint trace of vanilla, the perfume she always wore. She stopped just outside my personal space, respectful, yet close enough that I could feel the radiant warmth coming off her. She didn't ask how I was doing. She knew. She didn't offer empty platitudes about how things would get better. She simply held out the mug. "It's cold in here, Elias," she said. I looked at her hand. It was smooth, unblemished, steady, contrasted against my own, which felt weathered and tired. The difference in our years was undeniable. But as I reached out and took the mug, our fingers brushed for the briefest second. A spark. Tiny, electric, and terrifyingly alive. It traveled up my arm and settled right in the center of that hollow feeling in my chest. I took a sip. The heat spread through me, chasing away the chill of the window. I looked at her, really looked at her over the rim of the cup. The city lights reflected in her dark eyes. She wasn't leaving. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt shared. They say business is just business, but in this town it's high school with more expensive suits. 2 weeks later, I found myself sitting in a bistro that was too loud, too crowded, and too pretentious. Across from me sat a client who was more interested in the rumors of my divorce than the portfolio I was presenting. I could feel the eyes in the room. I could hear the hushed whispers from the neighboring tables. "That's him. The one whose wife took the golden parachute and jumped." It was suffocating. The clatter of silverware felt like hail on a tin roof. I wanted to snap. I wanted to tell the client to sign the damn papers or leave. But at my age, you learn that anger is a luxury you can't always afford. So I wore my armor. I kept my spine straight, my voice level, and my hands folded calmly on the table. I played the part of the unshakable patriarch. But Sophie saw through the armor. She sat to my right taking notes. She wasn't checking her phone. She wasn't looking around the room. embarrassed to be seen with the sinking ship. She was watching me. And she wasn't looking at me like a boss or a mentor or a tragedy. She was looking at me with something that felt dangerously like admiration. When the lunch finally ended, the deal saved by a thread of patience I barely had left, we walked to my car in silence. The moment the heavy door of the sedan clicked shut, sealing us inside, the noise of the world vanished. It was just the hum of the engine and the soft, leather-scented air conditioning. I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 2 hours. I leaned my head back against the headrest and closed my eyes, just for a second, letting the mask slip. "You were incredible in there." Her voice broke the silence. It was soft, close. I opened my eyes. She had turned in her seat to face me, her seatbelt crossing her chest. "I was tired, Sophie," I admitted. It was a confession I wouldn't have made to anyone else. "I'm too old for these games." "You're not old, Elias," she said, and the way she said my name without the Mr. attached made the air in the car feel suddenly thinner. "You're steady." They were all frantic, and you were the only real thing in that room. I looked at her. At 25, she should have been out chasing the next big opportunity, not sitting in a sedan with a man rebuilding his life from scrap. "Why are you still here?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. "You could go anywhere." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached out. Her hand hovered for a fraction of a second, a hesitation that spoke volumes, before landing gently on my forearm. The contact was startling. Through the fabric of my suit jacket, I could feel the ghost of her warmth. It wasn't a professional handshake. It was a tether, a grounding wire. "I'm here because I want to be," she whispered. Her thumb brushed against the fabric of my sleeve, a tiny rhythmic motion that seemed to sync with my pulse. "I don't want anywhere, Elias. I want to see what you build next." I looked down at her hand, so small and pale against my dark jacket. In that quiet car, with the scent of her vanilla perfume filling the small space between us, I realized something terrifying. She wasn't just loyal to the job. She was loyal to me. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't want to pull away. You think you'll feel a sense of victory when the person who tore your life apart finally stumbles. You expect a rush of satisfaction, vindication. But when the phone call came, telling me that my ex-wife's new venture, the one funded by the liquidation of our shared assets, was collapsing under the weight of her own mismanagement, I didn't feel triumph. I just felt tired. It was a waste. A waste of money, a waste of years, a waste of the pain it cost to get there. I needed air. I stepped out onto the office terrace. It was late autumn now, and the night air had teeth. It bit through my shirt, sharp and sobering. I walked to the edge and gripped the rough stone railing, the grit digging into my palms. I leaned forward, looking out at the skyline, trying to find some logic in the chaos of the last year. I didn't hear the door open. I only knew she was there because the air suddenly felt less hostile. Sophie moved to stand beside me. She didn't say anything at first. She just leaned her elbows on the railing, mirroring my posture, looking out at the same city. "I heard," she said quietly. Her voice was carried away by a gust of wind, but I caught it. "It's a mess," I muttered, keeping my eyes on the horizon. "She's going to lose everything." "She already lost everything," Sophie replied. I turned to look at her. She wasn't looking at the city. She was looking right at me, her gaze steady and unblinking. "She lost you, Elias. The money. That's just paper. Losing the person who believed in you, that's the bankruptcy that matters." Her words hit me harder than the cold wind. It wasn't the flattery of a subordinate. It was the conviction of a woman who saw me more clearly than I saw myself. A stray lock of her dark hair whipped across her face in the breeze. Without thinking, purely on instinct, I reached out to brush it back. My hand froze halfway. I remembered who I was. A 48-year-old man with a failed marriage and a bruised reputation. And she was 25, with her whole life unwritten. I had no right to touch her. I had no right to want the comfort she was offering. I started to pull my hand back, a retreat into safety. But Sophie didn't let me. She took a half step closer, closing the gap between us. She didn't grab my hand. She simply invaded the space where I was retreating. She was close enough now that I could feel the heat radiating from her body, a stark contrast to the freezing night. She looked up at me, her lips slightly parted, her breath hitching. A tiny audible sound that roared in my ears. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't pull away." She wasn't talking about my hand. She was talking about us. About the wall I kept trying to build. In that silence, the karma of my ex-wife failing faded into the background. The only thing that existed was the woman standing in front of me, challenging my restraint, daring me to bridge the years between us. I lowered my hand slowly, my knuckles grazing her cheek as I withdrew. It was a torture of my own making. I wanted to pull her into the coat, into me. But I stayed still, gripping the stone railing until my knuckles turned white, terrified that if I let go, I would never stop falling. We were 3 hours away from the city, tucked into a small corner booth of a restaurant that smelled of roasted garlic and old oak. The work trip was necessary, a final signature on the merger that would save the company, but sitting there it didn't feel like work. It felt like a date, and that terrified me. The lighting was low, the kind of warm, amber glow that softens the edges of the world. It caught in Sophie's hair and danced in the reflection of her wine glass. She was talking about the future, about where she saw the firm going, about ideas that were bold and bright and new. I listened, twirling the stem of my glass, feeling the weight of the years between us. "You have so much energy," I said, a small self-deprecating smile pulling at my lips. "It reminds me of how much I've slowed down. You need a partner who can run at your pace, Sophie. Not someone who's just trying to keep the lights on." I expected her to laugh it off, to tell me I wasn't that old. Instead, she stopped speaking. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, charged with something I had been trying to ignore for weeks. "I don't need someone to run with, Elias," she said. Her voice dropped an octave, losing its professional cadence and becoming something entirely personal. "I need someone who knows where they're going." She leaned forward. The table between us seemed to shrink. "You mistake your experience for baggage," she continued, her eyes searching mine. "You think because you've been hurt, you're damaged. But I look at you and I don't see damage. I see depth. I see a man who knows who he is. Do you have any idea how rare that is for a woman my age to find?" I opened my mouth to argue, to give her the responsible mentor-like speech about why this was a bad idea, about why I was a bad idea. But then she moved. Her hand slid across the dark wood of the table. It wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, slow, and agonizingly brave. She placed her hand over mine. The contact burned. Not in a painful way, but in a way that woke up nerves I thought had died years ago. Her palm was soft, incredibly warm against the back of my hand. My skin felt rough, weathered, texture colliding with silk. I stopped breathing. Literally stopped. I stared at our hands. The contrast was stark. The older man, the younger woman. The past and the future. "Sophie," I breathed, her name sounding like a plea. "Tell me to stop," she challenged softly, her thumb brushing against my knuckle, a feather-light stroke that sent a shiver straight down my spine. "Tell me you don't feel this. Tell me I'm just the loyal assistant, and I'll move my hand." I looked up from our hands to her face. Her eyes were wide, dilated, vulnerable but unflinching. I could have pulled away. I should have pulled away. Morality, optics, age, they all screamed at me to retreat. But the loneliness inside me had been so cold for so long, and her hand was so warm. I didn't pull away. Instead, purely on instinct, I turned my hand over beneath hers. My fingers curled upward, interlacing with hers. A lock clicking into place. "I can't," I whispered. "I can't tell you to stop." And in the amber light of that quiet restaurant, the mentor died, and the man finally woke up. There is a specific kind of suffocation that happens at high-end charity galas. The air smells of expensive champagne and desperation. It's a room full of people checking to see who is rising and who is falling. 6 months ago, walking into this room would have been my nightmare. I would have been the divorced guy, the one whose empire was rumored to be crumbling. But tonight I walked in with Sophie. She wore a dress the color of midnight, simple, elegant, and entirely distracting. She didn't cling to my arm like a trophy. She walked beside me with a quiet grace that drew eyes from across the room. She wasn't intimidated by the sharks in evening wear. She was amused by them. And then the crowd parted. And there she was. My past. My ex-wife stood near the bar, holding a martini glass a little too tightly. She looked frantic. The new life she had blown up our marriage for wasn't wearing well. Her smile was brittle, too wide, and didn't reach her eyes. She looked like someone trying to hold water in a sieve. When she saw us, her smile faltered. It dropped like a stone. She made a beeline for us. I felt Sophie tense slightly beside me, not out of fear but out of instinct. "Elias," my ex said, her voice pitched a little too high, cutting through the low hum of conversation. "I didn't expect to see you here." And her eyes flicked to Sophie, scanning her up and down with a look of disdain that barely masked her jealousy. "I didn't realize it was a bring your staff kind of event." The insult hung in the air, sharp and petty. A year ago that would have gutted me. A year ago I would have defended myself. But tonight? I felt nothing. No anger. No sting. Just a profound sense of indifference. I looked at the woman I had spent 2 decades with, and she looked like a stranger. A stranger who was drowning. I didn't say a word to her. Instead, I turned my attention to Sophie. I shifted my stance, placing myself subtly between them. Then I did something I had never done in public. I reached out and placed my hand on the small of Sophie's back. It wasn't a tentative touch. It was firm. Claiming. My palm pressed against the silk of her dress, feeling the warmth of her skin beneath, the solid curve of her spine. It was a gesture that said, "She is with me, and she is mine." I felt Sophie lean back into my touch, trusting me to hold her. The connection was electric, a current running between us that shut out everything else. "Sophie isn't here as staff," I said, my voice low, calm, and utterly final. It rumbled in my chest, deep enough for only the 3 of us to hear. "She's the reason I'm smiling again." The color drained from my ex-wife's face. She looked from me to Sophie, and then to my hand resting protectively on Sophie's waist. She saw it then. The karma. It wasn't that she had lost the money. It was that she had walked away from a man who would have moved the world for her, only to watch him move it for someone else. "We have a table to get to," I said, nodding politely. I guided Sophie away, my hand never leaving the small of her back. As we walked into the crowd, leaving the wreckage of my past behind us, Sophie looked up at me. Her eyes were shining. "You okay?" she whispered. I tightened my hold on her waist just a fraction. "I've never been better." Adrenaline is a liar. It makes you feel 10 feet tall. It makes you feel bulletproof. But when the lights go down and the music stops and you're standing in the quiet of a hotel suite with the woman you love, the adrenaline fades. And the truth settles in. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, loosening my tie. The silk hissed as I pulled it from my collar. I looked at my reflection. Under the harsh halogen vanity lights, I didn't see the man who had commanded the room an hour ago. I saw the gray in my beard. I saw the deep lines etched around my eyes, road maps of stress, of loss, of 48 years of living. Sophie was in the other room. I could hear the soft rustle of her dress as she moved, the click of her heels coming off. She was 25. Vibrant. Just starting. A wave of guilt washed over me, cold and sudden. What was I doing? Was I stealing her time? Was I becoming the cliché? The older man using a younger woman to feel alive again? I gripped the edge of the sink, hanging my head. "Elias." Her voice came from the doorway. Soft. Concerned. I didn't turn around. I couldn't look at her yet. "You should go, Sophie," I said. My voice sounded ragged, stripped of its earlier strength. Tonight was a statement. But tomorrow is reality. You don't belong in my world. You deserve someone who can give you a future without a past attached to it. The silence that followed was terrifying. I expected the sound of the door closing. I expected her to finally agree, to realize that the gap between us, 23 years, was too wide to bridge. Instead, I heard footsteps. She didn't leave. She came closer. I watched her reflection join mine in the mirror. She had taken off her shoes, making her shorter, emphasizing the difference in our stature. She stepped right up behind me, her body hovering inches from my back. "Is that what you think?" she whispered. "That I'm here for a future? You should be," I said, meeting her eyes in the glass. "I have baggage, Sophie. I have scars. I have an ex-wife who will make things difficult. You should be with someone uncomplicated." She reached out. Her hands, so pale and smooth, slid around my waist. She pressed her cheek against my back, right between my shoulder blades. I could feel the heat of her skin through my dress shirt. I tried uncomplicated, she murmured, her voice vibrating against my spine. It was boring. It was empty. She moved then, stepping around to face me, blocking the mirror. Blocking the reflection of the old man I feared I was. She reached up, her fingertips cool against my skin. She traced the worry lines on my forehead, then the crow's feet at the corners of my eyes. It wasn't a touch of pity. It was reverence. Like she was reading a map she wanted to memorize. These aren't reasons to leave, Elias, she said, her eyes locking onto mine, fierce and tear-bright. These are the reasons I stay. Your baggage is what makes you deep. Your age. It's what makes you safe. It's what makes you you. She leaned in, her breath ghosting over my lips. Don't you dare try to be noble and push me away, she whispered. Because I'm not going anywhere. My resolve crumbled. The walls I had built to protect her from me turned to dust. I let out a shuddering breath, my hands finding her waist, pulling her flesh against me. I wasn't holding her back. I was holding on for dear life. And in that moment I finally forgave myself for loving her. Sunday mornings used to be the hardest part of the week. In my old life they were silent, sterile, and filled with the unspoken distance between two people who had forgotten how to love each other. But this Sunday is loud. I stood in the doorway of the sunroom, a mug of coffee in each hand. The air smelled of fresh pine sawdust, French roast coffee, and the earthy scent of potting soil. We weren't just rebuilding a relationship, we were literally building a home. Sophie was on her knees on the floor, surrounded by terracotta pots. She was repotting a fern, her hands covered in dark soil, a smudge of dirt on her nose. She was humming something soft, a tune I didn't recognize but had come to love simply because it was hers. The sunlight streamed through the sheer curtains, turning the dust motes into dancing specks of gold. It washed over her, highlighting the curve of her neck and the focus in her eyes. I watched her for a long moment, feeling a lump form in my throat. Not of sadness but of overwhelming gratitude. I remembered the phone call I'd received yesterday. Mutual friends mentioned my ex-wife. She was selling the house. The new partner hadn't worked out. She was starting over again, alone and bitter. 6 months ago that news would have felt like justice. It would have been the karma I thought I wanted. But standing there, watching Sophie gently pack soil around a fragile green stem, I realized that karma isn't about the other person suffering. Karma is the universe clearing the path so you can find where you actually belong. The betrayal hadn't been a tragedy. It had been an eviction notice from a life that was too small for me. You're staring, Sophie said without looking up, a smile playing on her lips. I'm admiring, I corrected, walking into the room. I sat down on the floor beside her, something I never would have done in my old life. My knees popped slightly, a reminder of my 49 years, and Sophie laughed. A warm, bright sound that filled the corners of the room. Coffee? I asked, holding out the mug. She wiped her hands on her jeans, careless, comfortable, and took it. Her fingers brushed mine, warm and familiar now. The electricity was still there, but it had settled into a steady, comforting hum. A generator that could power a lifetime. Thank you, she said, taking a sip. She looked at me over the rim, her eyes softening. You look happy, Elias. I leaned back against the wall, stretching my legs out next to hers. I am, I admitted, the truth of it surprising even me. I was thinking about how terrified I was. Of starting over. Of you. Sophie set the mug down and shifted, resting her head on my shoulder. The simple weight of her against me felt like an anchor. And now, she asked. I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her closer. I could feel the steady rhythm of her breathing syncing with mine. Now, I said softly, kissing the top of her head, inhaling the scent of vanilla and sunlight. Now I realized that I wasn't running out of time. I was just waiting for my second chance to start. I took her hand in mine, her soil-stained fingers interlaced with my clean ones. Perfect mess. A perfect fit. The storm was over. The karma had hit, and it had left me exactly where I was supposed to be. Right here with her. Fade out with a warm, acoustic guitar chord. They say the best revenge is living well, but I think the best revenge is simply finding peace. If Elias and Sophie's story resonated with you tonight, If you believe that second chances are worth waiting for, please hit the like button. It helps more people find this quiet corner of the internet. And I want to hear from you. In the comments below, tell me, have you ever had a moment where a closing door actually led you to something better? I read every single story you share. For more stories about love that waits and connections that heal, subscribe and turn on notifications. Until next time, sleep well.